I knew this estate was dangerous from the moment I stepped through those reinforced steel gates in upstate New York 6 months ago. Most Omegas would be utterly terrified to work here, and rightfully so. These 4 alphas, Vince Romano, Jax Miller, Dom Salvatore, and Wyatt Hayes, weren't just wealthy businessmen. They were the undisputed lords of the East Coast underworld, the kind of men whose names were only whispered in dark rooms. And me, I was just their timid maid, a submissive Omega who kept his head bowed, scrubbed their marble floors, and practically merged with the wallpaper whenever they walked past. But I wasn't here out of desperation, nor was I hiding because I feared them. I was hiding from my own brother, Lincoln Vance, the most ruthless mob boss in Manhattan. Lincoln had given me everything except the one thing I truly desired: the right to cook. After I accidentally blew up our syndicate secondary base while trying to flambe a duck, he permanently banned me from every kitchen in his territory. I couldn't accept that, so the legendary underworld assassin packed his bags, masked his scent, and infiltrated the rival pack lair. Why? Because this upstate mansion boasted a $500,000 state-of-the-art industrial kitchen that I was absolutely dying to use. Tonight was supposed to be my masterpiece. The alphas were out at a casino meeting, and I had the entire kitchen to myself. I tied my apron tight, preheated the imported French convection oven, and began preparing a batch of classic egg tarts. I followed the recipe perfectly, or at least I thought I did. I might have substituted a few ingredients and tweaked the baking temperature to save time. At exactly 2:14 a.m., I realized my mistake. The egg tarts hadn't just burned, they had somehow achieved a state of dark matter, a chemical reaction so volatile that a thick, acrid yellow-green smoke began rolling out of the oven vents. It smelled less like ruined pastries and more like a localized biological attack. Before I could even reach for a towel, the mansion biometric biohazard alarm shrieked to life. Red emergency lights began flashing violently across the pristine white marble. Panic gripped my chest. It wasn't the fear of an assassin being caught behind enemy lines. It was the pure, unadulterated terror of being fired and permanently losing my access to this glorious 6-burner gas stove. My muscle memory honed from years of wet work and disposing of corpses kicked in instantly. In less than 3 seconds, I vaulted over the central island, punched the override code into the ventilation panel, and snatched the scorching cast iron tray barehanded. Ignoring the searing pain in my palms, I dumped the radioactive-looking rock-solid tarts straight into the heavy-duty industrial disposal unit. I hit the grinder switch just as the heavy oak doors of the kitchen burst open. I froze my hands, gripping the edge of the sink, my breathing erratic. It was Vince Romano, the Italian Don himself. He was dressed in a dark, unbuttoned dress shirt, an undeniably lethal aura radiating from his massive frame. His icy gray eyes swept the room, taking in the lingering, toxic haze. I braced myself for the inevitable. He was going to kill me, or worse, banish me from his house forever. I quickly dropped my gaze, adopting my usual terrified Omega persona, my shoulders trembling in what I hoped looked like pathetic submission. Tyler Vince spoke. His voice wasn't raised in anger. Instead, it was a calm, dark velvet purr that seemed to vibrate straight through the floorboards and into my bones. "Are you all right?" I blinked, genuinely thrown off. I am so sorry, sir," I stammered, making sure my voice wavered perfectly. I couldn't sleep. I just wanted to bake a small snack. I burned it. Please don't fire me." Vince didn't look at the still-smoking oven. He didn't look at the flashing red lights. He was looking only at me. He crossed the vast kitchen with slow, measured steps, moving like a predator that had just cornered something fascinating. My heart hammered against my ribs. When an alpha like Vince Romano locks his absolute attention onto you, the air pressure in the room literally changes. He stopped mere inches from me. I was trapped between the sink and his broad chest. He leaned down, his face hovering just near the crook of my neck, right over my scent gland. I held my breath, terrified he would smell the gunpowder and blood of my past beneath my Omega suppressants. Instead, Vince closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. When an Omega is panicked, their pheromones spike. Amidst the foul chemical stench of my disastrous baking, my natural scent was desperately trying to soothe me, flooding the space between us with heavy notes of sweet vanilla and warm butter. Vince let out a low, rumbling growl from the back of his throat. It was an intensely intimate, possessive sound that made my knees genuinely weak for a second. He raised a large, calloused hand and gently brushed a dusting of flour off my cheek. His touch was burning hot. "You smell," Vince murmured, his voice strained as if he was fighting a deeply ingrained instinct. He opened his eyes, and they were completely blown wide dark with an unspoken hunger, like vanilla and home. I stared at him in pure bewilderment. Was his sense of smell broken? The room literally smelled like a chemical warfare testing site. "I will pay for the damages out of my salary, Mr. Romano," I whispered, keeping up the act. "Just please let me keep working here. I will stay away from the kitchen." "No," Vince commanded softly, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "You will not stay away from the kitchen. From now on, you are the designated kitchen Omega. You can bake whatever you want, whenever you want, but only for us. Do you understand, Tyler?" I nodded slowly, utterly baffled but secretly victorious. The Mafia Don was clearly out of his mind, intoxicated by my pheromones. But honestly, I didn't care. I had just secured unlimited access to the ovens. Whatever strange possessive game Vince Romano thought he was playing, I was willing to endure it as long as I could try baking my macaron recipe tomorrow. I survived the night. Not only did I survive, but Vince Romano, the undisputed king of the East Coast, had essentially handed me the keys to the kingdom. When I woke up the next morning, I fully expected my new title of Designated Kitchen Omega to be a fever dream brought on by toxic gas inhalation, but the massive industrial kitchen was empty, spotless, and completely mine. I didn't waste a second. Today, I was going to tackle blueberry muffins. I approached the marble counter with the same intense focus I used to reserve for assembling sniper rifles in the dark. I measured the flour, poured the milk, and began to knead the batter. Perhaps I kneaded it a bit too aggressively, treating the dough with the same brutal force I used to interrogate rival gang members. But I was convinced that maximum pressure yielded maximum flavor. I shoved the heavy iron tray into the oven, wiped a smudge of flour from my cheek, and waited. An hour later, the kitchen doors swung open. It wasn't Vince this time. It was Jax Miller and Dom Salvatore. Jax was a terrifying mountain of muscle and violence, his neck and arms covered in intricate tattoos that bled into the collar of his black t-shirt. He was the pack enforcer, a man who broke bones for a living. Beside him, Dom was his complete opposite, a lethal predator wrapped in a custom three-piece Italian suit. As the mastermind behind their casino empire, Dom's silver tongue was just as dangerous as Jack's brass knuckles. Normally, seeing two apex alphas walk into a room would send any sane Omega scrambling for a hiding spot. I instinctively dropped my gaze and hunched my shoulders, falling back into my timid maid routine. "Tyler, isn't it?" Dom purred, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. He stopped on the other side of the kitchen island, his sharp, dark eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Vince told us about your new promotion." "Yes, sir," I squeaked, wringing my hands in my apron. Jax didn't say a word. He just stepped closer, his broad chest expanding as he took a deep breath. I saw his pupils dilate slightly. The heavy, intoxicating scent of my vanilla pheromones was still lingering in the air, mixing with the smell of the freshly baked muffins I had just pulled from the oven. "What is that?" Jax grunted, his deep voice scraping like sandpaper against stone. "Blueberry muffins, sir," I offered, blinking up at them through my lashes with what I hoped looked like pure, innocent Omega desperation. "I just made them. Would you like to try one?" I held my breath. Back in Manhattan, whenever I offered my brother Lincoln a baked good, he would immediately call the bomb squad. He explicitly told me my cooking violated the Geneva Conventions. But Dom smiled a dangerously charming smirk that probably made his enemies willingly sign away their lives. "We would love to, Tyler." I eagerly handed them each a muffin. They were a bit dense. Actually, they weighed about 3 pounds each and had the structural integrity of reinforced concrete, but they looked brown and shiny on the outside. Jax took the first bite. A loud, echoing crack rang through the kitchen. It sounded suspiciously like a molar fracturing under extreme duress. Jax froze. The veins in his massive neck bulged. His eyes watered instantly, and I could practically see his internal organs screaming in pure agony as he forced his jaw to chew the weaponized pastry. Dom, trying to maintain his suave composure, took a more delicate bite. His jaw locked. A look of sheer, unadulterated horror flashed across his handsome face. He chewed with the grim determination of a man swallowing a cyanide capsule, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the counter. Is it okay?" I asked, my voice trembling, though inside I was genuinely ecstatic. Someone was finally eating my food. Jax swallowed a visible lump traveling down his throat. He looked at me, his eyes slightly bloodshot, completely intoxicated by the heavy wave of hopeful pheromones I was accidentally projecting. Outstanding Jax choked out his voice hoarse. "Best damn muffin I have ever had." Truly Dom gasped, coughing discreetly into his fist. "A culinary masterpiece, Tyler. We will take the rest of these to the study, to eat. All of them." They grabbed the entire iron tray and practically fled the kitchen. I stood there, beaming with pride. They were so cute. These terrifying, cold-blooded mobsters were actually big softies. Lincoln was an idiot. My baking was clearly incredible. Over the next few days, the dynamic in the house shifted entirely. The four alphas who used to treat me like a piece of invisible furniture were suddenly finding excuses to hover around my kitchen. They ate my rock-hard biscuits, they drank my overly salted soups, and they praised every single radioactive disaster I created. My guard, honed by years of surviving, the underground slowly began to lower, which was a massive mistake. On Friday evening, I was prepping a massive cut of beef for dinner. I was humming, happily lost in my own world. The knife in my hand was a custom Japanese Damascus steel cleaver. Without thinking, my muscle memory took over. My posture straightened. The timid Omega facade evaporated. I spun the heavy cleaver effortlessly around my fingers, flipping it in a blur of deadly silver before bringing it down in a series of blindingly fast, surgically precise cuts. It wasn't the technique of a chef, it was the flawless, lethal dismemberment tactic of a cartel executioner. For a split second, a suffocating, blood-chilling wave of pure killing intent my sake leaked out of me. Nice knife work. I gasped, nearly dropping the cleaver. I spun around instinctively, shifting my weight onto the balls of my feet for a lethal strike. Leaning casually against the doorframe was Wyatt Hayes, the fourth alpha, the pack legendary sniper. His golden brown eyes were narrowed, locking onto the way I was holding the knife in a reverse tactical combat grip. My heart stopped. I had slipped. I was compromised. I quickly dropped the knife and shrank back, trying to force my vanilla scent to spike in panic. "I am sorry, sir. I was just..." Wyatt didn't draw his weapon. He didn't sound the alarm. Instead, a slow, predatory smirk spread across his face. He looked at the perfectly butchered meat, then back to my trembling, flour-dusted form. "Relax, little Omega," Wyatt murmured, his eyes flashing with dark amusement as he pushed off the doorframe. "You do not have to hide your claws from me. I think a little defiance is cute." I stared at his retreating back, utterly bewildered. Did he just mistake my professional assassination skills for an Omega sassy attitude? This Mafia pack was completely out of their minds, but as long as they kept eating my food, I was staying right here. By my third week at the Romano estate, I had essentially established a culinary dictatorship. The kitchen was my absolute domain. I had customized the spice racks, recalibrated the burners, and even designated a specific marble slab solely for pastry kneading. The four most feared men on the eastern seaboard now cautiously knocked before entering my workspace, like peasants requesting an audience with the king. Tonight, I was attempting French baguettes. It was 2 a.m. The mansion was wrapped in a suffocating heavy silence. I had followed the traditional Parisian recipe meticulously, though I may have miscalculated the hydration ratio and baked them on the highest convection setting for an extra hour just to be safe. When I pulled the metal tray from the oven, the baguettes didn't emit a soft, hollow thud when tapped. They sounded like I was striking solid titanium. They were perfectly golden brown, yet possessed the physical density of depleted uranium. I was incredibly proud of them. I was just admiring my work when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't a sound. It was an absence of sound. The subtle hum of the central air conditioning had been cut. My assassin instincts flared, instantly dropping my heart rate and shifting my body into a defensive coil. A shadow detached itself from the ceiling air vent above the central island. A man dressed in tactical black gear dropped silently onto the marble floor. He wore a balaclava, and in his right hand was a suppressed heckler in Coke USP. He was a professional hitman, likely sent by a rival syndicate to assassinate the sleeping alphas upstairs. He landed perfectly, turning his weapon toward me, probably intending to eliminate the witness before moving to his primary targets. I didn't care about my life. I had dodged bullets since I was 15, but what I did care about was the trajectory of his gun. He was aiming squarely at my chest, and directly behind me was my beloved $500,000 imported French convection oven with its pristine double-paned glass door. If he fired, the bullet would go clean through me and shatter my oven. That was completely unacceptable. Before the hitman finger could even squeeze the trigger, my body moved. I grabbed the freshly baked 3-pound carbon-dense baguette from the cooling rack. In one fluid, blindingly fast motion, I pivoted on my heel and swung the bread like a Major League Baseball bat. A sickeningly loud crack echoed. The sound was sickeningly loud, like a wooden bat connecting with a watermelon. The baguette struck the assassin perfectly on the temple. The sheer, blunt force trauma shattered his night vision goggles and instantly short-circuited his brain. His eyes rolled back into his head, his gun clattered across the floor, and he collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. I stood over his unconscious body, the lethal pastry still gripped tightly in my hand. The baguette hadn't even chipped. It was a structural marvel. Suddenly, the heavy kitchen doors were kicked off their hinges. "Tyler!" Vince and Jax burst into the room, both shirtless, radiating an overwhelming, terrifying amount of alpha aggression. They were armed to the teeth, their eyes sweeping the room for threats. The estate's silent perimeter alarms must have triggered them. Panic hit me. I was standing over a neutralized professional killer holding a weaponized loaf of bread in a tactical combat stance. I had seconds to fix this. I immediately dropped the baguette. It hit the marble floor with a heavy thud that cracked a tile. I shrank my shoulders, forced my eyes to well up with tears, and let a spike of pure, distressed vanilla pheromones flood the room. I let out a pathetic, terrified whimper. Vince's eyes locked onto me, then dropped to the unconscious assassin at my feet. The lethal aura surrounding him vanished, replaced entirely by blind panic. In 2 strides, he crossed the room, kicking the assassin gun away, before pulling me firmly into his broad, heavily tattooed chest. "I have got you." Vince rumbled, his voice thick with raw emotion, burying his face in my hair to inhale my scent. "You are safe, Omega. I am here." Jax stepped over the body, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would shatter. He prodded the unconscious hitman with his combat boot. "What the hell happened?" Jax growled, his eyes scanning the room for secondary shooters. "Did he touch you?" "No." I sobbed, gripping Vince's shirt with trembling hands, playing the fragile Omega role to absolute perfection. "I was just taking my bread out of the oven and he fell from the ceiling," I screamed, and he got scared, slipped on some loose flour, and hit his head on the counter. Jax looked at the pristine flour-free floor. Then he looked at the massive red welt forming on the side of the assassin head. Finally, he looked at my tear-streaked face. The terrifying Alpha Enforcer completely abandoned logic. "Clumsy bastard," Jax spat, kicking the assassin again. "He could have hurt you. I'm going to take him down to the basement and have a very long conversation with him." Vince tightened his arms around me, his warmth seeping into my cold skin. "It is over, Tyler. We won't let anyone get near you ever again. We promise." Over the next week, the Alpha's overprotective tendencies skyrocketed to absurd levels. I was no longer a maid, I was the untouchable core of their pack. Wyatt the sniper casually handed me a new cooking apron one afternoon. "Custom order," he murmured, avoiding my eyes. "Special Italian fabric. Thought it would match your eyes." The apron weighed 10 pounds. It was lined with military-grade Kevlar. I wore it proudly while baking cookies. Dom, the smooth-talking casino boss, slid a solid black Limitless credit card across the counter to me. For groceries, he smiled, his dark eyes warm. "I noticed you were running low on vanilla extract. Buy whatever you need, Tyler. Buy the supermarket if you want." I stared at the black card, a strange, tight feeling blooming in my chest. Back in Manhattan, Lincoln just gave me stacks of bloody cash and told me to buy more ammunition. Here, these ruthless mobsters were giving me body armor and unlimited funds just so I could comfortably bake terrible food. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. I felt like I belonged. The urge to confess everything, my past, my lethal skills, my real surname rested heavy on my tongue. But that afternoon, Dom walked into the kitchen, his usually charming face drawn into a tight, grim line. "Vince is calling an emergency pack meeting," Dom said, pouring himself a shot of whiskey at 3 p.m. "Lincoln Vance, the head of the Manhattan Syndicate, has officially lost his mind. He is mobilizing his entire army, tearing up the East Coast looking for someone. It's only a matter of time before his men cross into our territory." My heart dropped into my stomach. My vanilla scent instantly soured with genuine anxiety. Lincoln was looking for me. And when my brother found out I was living in a rival pack house, making them Kevlar-protected cookies, the streets of New York were going to drown in blood. Time was up. The tension in the Romano estate over the next 48 hours was thick enough to choke on. The air was practically vibrating with aggressive territorial alpha pheromones. It started on Tuesday morning. I was bringing a tray of my newly invented espresso-infused charcoal biscuits, which were literally just burnt biscuits, into the main study when I saw it. Resting in the center of Vince's massive mahogany desk was a thick, black envelope sealed with dark red wax. I recognized that wax seal instantly. It was the crest of the Vance Syndicate, my brother Crest. Vince, Jax, Dom, and Wyatt were standing around the desk, their expressions carved from stone. The temperature in the room had dropped 10 degrees. Read it again. Jax growled his massive hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. Dom picked up the heavy parchment, his usually smooth voice dripping with pure venom. Return him to me by midnight on Friday, or I will personally reduce upstate New York to ash. You have my word. Signed, Lincoln Vance. I stopped dead in my tracks, the tray trembling in my hands. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. Lincoln had found my exact location, and knowing my brother, the threat of reducing upstate to ash wasn't a metaphor. He probably already had C4 planted on the perimeter bridges. That arrogant Manhattan bastard Wyatt hissed softly from the shadows of the corner, methodically cleaning his sniper rifle. He thinks he can just demand our Omega as leverage. I blinked momentarily stunned. Leverage. He knows Tyler is our weakness. Vince stated his voice a low, dangerous rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. His icy gray eyes locked onto me, softening instantly as he crossed the room to take the heavy tray from my shaking hands. Lincoln understands pack dynamics. He thinks if he kidnaps our Omega, he can force us to surrender our eastern seaboard territories. It is a classic dirty Mafia tactic. I stared at Vince, my mouth slightly open. I wanted to scream. Lincoln didn't want their territory. Lincoln wanted me to come home so I would stop humiliating the Vance family name by trying to bake French pastries in enemy territory. Do not look so terrified, Tesoro Dom murmured, stepping close and gently wiping a smudge of flour from my cheek. We will go to war with the entire city of New York before we let Lincoln Vance lay a single finger on you. That was exactly what I was afraid of. If these four went to war with my brother, the collateral damage would be catastrophic. More importantly, my beloved convection oven might get caught in the crossfire. I had to fix this. I needed an escape plan. But first, I needed premium Madagascan vanilla extract. My current recipe called for it, and the estate was entirely out. That night, I waited until the mansion was eerily quiet. Slipping out of the reinforced estate wasn't difficult for someone who used to infiltrate maximum security prisons for a living. I bypassed the biometric locks, evaded Wyatt's sniper rotation, and slipped into the humid night air. My destination was a covert black market located in a derelict warehouse district in Brooklyn. It was a neutral ground for the underworld, a place where you could buy untraceable weapons, forged passports, and if you knew the right smuggler, incredibly rare baking ingredients. I kept my head down, wearing an oversized black hoodie to mask my scent and conceal my face. I successfully purchased 3 vials of the rare vanilla extract, tucking them safely into my pocket. I was just turning down a damp, neon-lit alleyway to head back when a chillingly familiar voice echoed off the brick walls. Well, well, look who finally came out of hiding. I froze. Emerging from the shadows at the end of the alley were 5 heavily armed men wearing tailored black suits. At their helm was Marco Lincoln, top lieutenant. "The boss is losing his mind looking for you," Tyler Marco said, drawing a suppressed Glock. "He told us to bring you back in one piece. Do yourself a favor and get in the car." My combat instincts flared instantly. I dropped my center of gravity, my eyes rapidly calculating the trajectory of their weapons and the most efficient way to break Marco windpipe without dropping my vanilla extract. I slipped my hand into my jacket, gripping the cold steel of my tactical karambit knife. Before I could move, the deafening screech of tires shattered the night. 2 matte black SUVs tore into the alleyway, blocking the exit. The doors blew open before the vehicles even stopped. What followed was a display of pure, unrestrained alpha violence. Wyatt didn't even step out of the car. A sniper bullet shattered the street lamp above Marco's head, plunging the alley into darkness. Jax erupted from the vehicle like a force of nature, completely ignoring the gunfire as he closed the distance, lifting one of Lincoln enforcers off the ground by his throat and throwing him through a brick wall. Dom moved with terrifying, fluid elegance, his twin pistols barking with surgical precision, disarming 2 men in the blink of an eye. And then there was Vince. The Don of the East Coast didn't bother with a gun. He walked straight into the line of fire, a terrifying aura of dominant alpha rage radiating from his massive frame. He grabbed Marco's wrist, snapping it with a sickening crunch, before kicking the man so hard he collapsed in a wheezing heap. The entire skirmish lasted less than 30 seconds. Lincoln men were groaning on the pavement, completely neutralized. I quickly let go of my knife, shrank my shoulders, and dropped to my knees, forcing my breathing to become erratic and panicked. Tyler Vince roared, abandoning his lethal composure. He sprinted toward me, dropping to his knees on the filthy asphalt and pulling me fiercely into his chest. His heart was hammering against my cheek. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "No," I stammered, gripping his lapels and letting a distressed wave of vanilla pheromones flood the alley. I just wanted to buy vanilla extract, and they surrounded me. Jax loomed over Marco, groaning body, his boots soaked in blood. Lincoln Vance sent his dogs to kidnap our Omega in the middle of the street. Jax spat, his eyes burning with a terrifying protective fire. This is a declaration of war. Dom knelt beside me, his tailored suit ruined by the grime of the alley, but he didn't care. He gently cupped my face. "It is over, Tyler. You are safe. We have got you." Vince picked me up effortlessly, carrying me toward the SUV like I was made of fragile glass. He pressed his lips firmly against my hair. "Listen to me, Tyler," Vince said, his voice absolute and unyielding. "I don't care if Lincoln Vance brings his entire army to our gates. I don't care if the streets burn. No one takes you from us. Ever." I buried my face in his neck, genuine tears pricking my eyes. They were willing to burn the world down just to keep me safe. It was the most romantic, terrifying, and deeply touching thing anyone had ever done for me. I just wished they weren't about to start World War III over a tray of burnt cookies. The day after the alleyway shootout, I was a nervous wreck. And when I get nervous, I bake. I had locked myself in the kitchen, aggressively kneading a massive batch of sourdough. I was trying to ignore the fact that the entire Romano estate was currently operating under a level 5 lockdown. The windows were shuttered with titanium plating. Armed guards patrolled every corridor, and the 4 alphas had transformed the drawing room into a tactical war room. Lincoln Vance was coming, and I had dragged my new deeply confused family into the crosshairs of Manhattan's deadliest syndicate. I was just dusting the dough with a heavy layer of flour when a sudden violent wave of dizziness hit me. I stumbled, gripping the edge of the marble island. My internal temperature spiked instantly, making my skin flush hot. My breath hitched, coming out in shallow, ragged gasps. A sickeningly sweet, overwhelmingly thick scent of pure vanilla began to pour from my scent glands, filling the vast kitchen in seconds. It was a heat cycle, and it was nearly a month early. I panicked. Had I inhaled too much active dry yeast? Or perhaps it was the suffocating amount of aggressive territorial alpha pheromones Vince and the others had been projecting for the last 24 hours. Whatever the biological trigger was, my Omega instincts were violently hijacking my nervous system. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the pristine floor, clutching my chest as the excruciating ache of an unbonded heat ripped through my body. Within 30 seconds, the kitchen doors burst open. Vince, Jax, Dom, and Wyatt rushed in. The moment the tidal wave of my vanilla scent hit them all, 4 of them froze dead in their tracks. Their pupils dilated instantly, swallowing their irises until their eyes were pitch black. A low, synchronized primal growl vibrated through the room. 4 apex predators had just walked into a room with a desperate, unbonded Omega in the throes of a heat. In the underworld, this was a death sentence. An Omega in this situation was nothing more than prey. I squeezed my eyes shut, curling into a ball, terrified of what their base instincts would make them do. "Get back," Vince roared, not at me, but at his own men. I opened my eyes, trembling. Vince was gripping the doorframe so hard the wood was splintering under his massive fingers. The veins in his neck were bulging as he fought a literal war against his own biology. Jax had punched the wall, using physical pain to anchor his mind. Dom was breathing heavily through his mouth, while Wyatt had taken 3 steps back into the hallway, refusing to cross the threshold. Tyler Vince gasped out his voice, a strained, gravelly rasp. "Can you walk?" No, I whimpered, a fresh wave of heat making my vision blur. Vince pulled a black military-grade auto-injector from his tactical vest. Without a second of hesitation, he slammed the needle directly into his own thigh. It was a heavy-duty alpha suppressant, a drug so potent it felt like liquid fire in the veins and was known to cause agonizing side effects. Jax, Dom, and Wyatt immediately mirrored his actions, pulling their own injectors and stabbing themselves. They were intentionally crippling their own alpha natures just to keep me safe from themselves. Once the drugs took effect, dulling their eyes back to their normal colors, Vince crossed the room. He didn't grab me. He didn't claim me. He gently scooped me up, wrapping me securely in my Kevlar-lined apron, and carried me to the estate-reinforced panic room. They placed me on a massive velvet-lined bed, setting out water and pain medications. Then all four of them stepped outside the thick steel door, leaving it cracked open just an inch so I wouldn't feel trapped, but ensuring a physical barrier remained between us. "We do not take what isn't freely given," Tesoro Dom voice floated through the crack, thick with exhaustion and unwavering devotion. "We will sit right outside this door until it passes. You are safe." Lying there in the dim light, clutching a pillow to my chest, a profound realization hit me harder than one of my weaponized concrete muffins. I loved them. I was an orphan, an assassin, a ghost, who lived in the shadow of my tyrannical older brother. I had spent my whole life being useful, being lethal, or being a nuisance in the kitchen. But to these four terrifying mobsters, I was precious. They were willing to endure agonizing chemical suppressants and risk an all-out war with Manhattan just to ensure I felt respected and secure. "We know you sneak out," Tyler Wyatt's quiet voice drifted through the gap, shattering my racing thoughts. My heart stopped. "You think a sniper misses an unauthorized exit?" Wyatt chuckled softly. "I had my thermal scope on you the entire time you walked to Brooklyn last night. Jax had 2 SUVs trailing you 3 blocks back. We let you go because we wanted you to feel free," Vince added, his deep voice vibrating through the steel door. "We thought you just needed space. But when Lincoln men cornered you, that was the line. You are our Omega, our only Omega. We don't care about your secrets, Tyler. We only care about you." Tears streamed down my hot cheeks. They knew. They didn't know everything, but they knew I wasn't just a simple maid, and they loved me anyway. I had to tell them the truth. I had to tell them my last name was Vance. I took a deep breath, forcing my heat-addled brain to focus. "Vince Dom, there is something I have to say." A deafening series of beeps violently cut off my confession as the estate perimeter breach alarms shrieked to life. The red emergency strobes flared to life, bathing the panic room in a harsh, bloody glow. The heavy thud of military-grade helicopter rotors rattled the ceiling. They breached the outer gates. Jax barked from the hallway, the sound of assault rifles being cocked, echoing loudly. It is an entire army. Lincoln Vance brought the whole damn Manhattan Syndicate. "Seal the panic room door," Vince commanded. His face appeared briefly in the gap of the door, his expression an absolute mask of lethal determination. "Stay inside, Tyler. Lock the deadbolts. We are going to end this." A heavy metallic clang echoed. The steel door slammed shut, locking me inside. I sat alone in the flashing red light. Outside, the muffled staccato of heavy machine gun fire erupted. They were out there fighting an impossible battle against my brother elite strike force. They were going to die to protect a lie. They were going to die protecting an assassin who was currently hiding in a bed. The heat cycle in my veins suddenly felt entirely insignificant, drowned out by a freezing wave of pure, concentrated adrenaline. The timid Omega facade melted away, completely replaced by the icy, calculated calm of the underworld's most lethal ghost. I stood up my legs, perfectly steady. I wiped the sweat from my brow. I tied my military-grade Kevlar apron tight around my waist. Then I walked over to the panic room emergency supply cache, bypassing the guns, and grabbed a custom perfectly balanced tactical combat knife. Nobody messes with my kitchen, and nobody, not even my psychotic older brother, gets to kill my alphas. It was time to bake some chaos. I didn't stay in the panic room. The moment the heavy artillery rattled the foundation of the estate, I engaged the manual override on the steel door. My heat cycle was completely suppressed by the lethal cocktail of adrenaline and combat instincts flooding my system. I wasn't an Omega hiding from predators anymore. I was the predator. I moved through the smoke-filled corridors like a ghost, completely silent. The estate was a war zone. The grand foyer was being shredded to pieces by heavy machine gun fire. Peeking from the shadows of the mezzanine, I assessed the tactical situation. It was grim. Vince, Jax, Dom, and Wyatt were pinned down behind the shattered remnants of a massive marble staircase. They were fighting like cornered beasts, taking down dozens of men, but they were vastly outnumbered. Jax's tactical vest was torn. Dom was reloading his last magazine with bloody hands. Wyatt was pinned behind a fallen pillar, and Vince was standing tall, firing his assault rifle with terrifying precision, refusing to yield an inch of ground that led toward my panic room. And standing at the grand entrance, flanked by 20 elite enforcers, was the devil himself. Lincoln Vance, my older brother. He was wearing a bespoke three-piece charcoal suit, looking completely unfazed by the storm of bullets. He held a custom gold-plated revolver, his dark eyes sweeping the ruined foyer with absolute contempt. "I won't ask again." Romano Lincoln voice boomed over the gunfire laced with lethal authority. "Hand him over, surrender the Omega, and I will let you keep your heads." "You will have to burn this city to the ground before you touch him." Vince roared back, his alpha pheromones flaring so aggressively they practically warped the air. I couldn't let them die for a lie. I stepped out from the shadows of the mezzanine. I didn't have a gun. I had my military-grade Kevlar apron tied tightly around my waist, a 12-inch Damascus steel meat cleaver in my right hand, and a heavy, solid-core cast iron skillet in my left. "Hey, Manhattan," I shouted. Every single gun in the foyer instantly swung toward the mezzanine. Tyler Vince yelled, his face draining of color. "Get back in the safe room." I ignored him. I locked eyes with Lincoln Top Lieutenant on the ground floor, who was raising his submachine gun toward Vince. Without a second of hesitation, my arm whipped forward. The heavy Damascus cleaver spun through the air in a blinding silver arc. A heavy thunk echoed. The blade buried itself to the hilt in the lieutenant tactical radio right against his chest, sending him crashing backward to the floor, completely neutralized. Before anyone could process what just happened, I vaulted over the railing, dropping 15 feet. I landed perfectly in a tactical crouch right beside Jax. One of Lincoln men rushed us from the flank. I didn't even blink. I pivoted on my heel and swung the cast iron skillet like a baseball bat. A loud metallic clang resonated. The brutal impact echoed through the hall. The enforcer jaw practically unhinged as he folded like a lawn chair. For the next 30 seconds, the grand foyer witnessed a display of flawless, terrifying cross-chemistry. I didn't disrupt the Alpha's rhythm, I weaponized it. I ducked under Dom's suppressive fire to sweep the legs of an advancing sniper. When Jax threw a man across the room, I caught him mid-air with the flat side of my skillet. Wyatt didn't even have to look. He fired a single sniper round through the collar of a man I had just thrown to the ground, pinning him to the floorboard. We were a perfectly synchronized machine of death. Suddenly, a deafening gunshot shattered the crystal chandelier above us. "Enough," Lincoln roared, stepping forward into the center of the foyer, his gun pointed straight at the ceiling. The firing ceased instantly. An eerie, smoking silence descended upon the ruined estate. Lincoln's eyes were wide, twitching with a mixture of profound relief and absolute, unadulterated sibling rage. He marched past his own men, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at my flour-dusted face. "Tyler Vance, you get your ass over here right this second," Lincoln bellowed entirely, dropping his Mafia, Don persona. "Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea how worried I was? I thought you were dead. I thought they kidnapped you. And what the hell are you doing with a frying pan?" I stepped out from behind Vince's massive frame, gripping my skillet defensively. "I am not coming home, Lincoln. You can't make me." "You are coming home, and you are never looking at a stove again." Lincoln screamed back, his chest heaving. "Do you want to blow up their estate too? You burned down my secondary safe house, making a flambe. You violated the Geneva Conventions with those blueberry muffins." "That is a lie," I shouted, genuinely offended, stomping my foot. "My baking is incredible. They love my baking. They ate an entire tray of my rock-hard espresso biscuits, and they said I was a culinary genius." The entire foyer went dead silent. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Vince, Jax, Dom, and Wyatt turned their heads to look at me. Their brains were visibly short-circuiting. Vance Dom whispered, the heavy realization dawning on his handsome, blood-spattered face. "Your last name is Vance." "You are the ghost of Manhattan," Wyatt murmured, lowering his sniper rifle, his eyes wide as he stared at the unconscious men I had just dismantled with kitchenware. "The deadliest assassin on the East Coast is our kitchen maid." Jax looked from me to my frying pan, and then to the terrifying leader of the Manhattan Syndicate. "Wait, Jax grunted his brain, struggling to process the math. So the muffins were actually a biological weapon. We didn't hallucinate the stomach cramps. Vince Romano, the ruthless, unshakable Don of the East Coast, stared blankly at Lincoln. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the Kevlar apron he had custom ordered to protect my fragile, delicate Omega body. Tyler, Vince said slowly, his voice completely hollow. Are you telling me that the only reason Lincoln brought an army to my gates is because he was trying to ban you from using our convection oven? I shrank my shoulders, suddenly feeling very small under their intense stares. I just wanted to make macaroons. I mumbled my vanilla scent, spiking nervously. Lincoln wouldn't let me use his kitchen anymore. Lincoln pinched the bridge of his nose, looking like he was about to have an aneurysm. He is a menace, Romano. Hand my little brother over. We will pay for the damages to your foyer, and we will leave. Vince blinked. Jax blinked. Dom and Wyatt exchanged a long, meaningful look. If Tyler was Lincoln's brother, and Tyler was their bonded Omega, that meant the man standing in front of them with an army wasn't their mortal enemy. He was their family. In terrifying unison, the 4 deadliest alphas on the eastern seaboard engaged their weapon safety locks. They dropped their guns to the floor. They stood up perfectly straight, smoothed their ruined, blood-stained suits, and bowed respectfully from the waist toward the Manhattan dawn. Good evening, brother-in-law, Vince said smoothly, his voice dripping with sudden overwhelming politeness. It is an honor to finally meet the family, Dom added, flashing his most charming casino smile. Lincoln Vance stared at the 4 bowing Mafia lords. He looked at me, clutching my frying pan. Then he looked at the ceiling, looking incredibly pale. Oh my God, Lincoln whispered, looking like he wanted to shoot himself. He fed you the muffins, didn't he? You are all brain damaged. The most heavily armed peace summit in the history of the American Mafia didn't take place in a shadowy warehouse or a high-rise boardroom. It took place around my custom marble kitchen island. The ruined grand foyer was currently being swept by dozens of confused, heavily armed men from both syndicates who just 20 minutes ago were actively trying to kill each other. Now they were awkwardly sharing cigarettes while waiting for orders. Inside the kitchen, the tension was thick enough to carve with my Damascus cleaver. Lincoln sat on one side of the island, his bespoke suit immaculate despite the war zone outside. Opposite him sat Vince, Jax, Dom, and Wyatt. They had washed the blood off their hands, but they still radiated the heavy territorial aura of 4 alphas who had just secured their mate. And in the center of the table, acting as the ultimate diplomatic offering, was a platter of my infamous, historically disastrous egg tarts. They were slightly green rock hard and smelled faintly of sulfur. I am going to ask you one more time, Romano Lincoln said slowly, his dark eyes locked onto the pastries as if they were live grenades. Are you absolutely certain about this? Because my little brother is a highly trained Tier 1 assassin who can dismantle a cartel with a paperclip. But if you let him near a gas stove, he becomes a walking weapon of mass destruction. Hey, I protested from the sink, untying my Kevlar apron. I am improving. Tyler, you made a flambe that blew the roof off a safe house. Lincoln deadpanned, not breaking eye contact with Vince. I had to bribe the fire marshal and the mayor to cover it up. Vince didn't blink. He reached forward with large, steady hands and picked up one of the radioactive-looking egg tarts. He brought it to his mouth and took a bite. A loud crunching sound echoed through the silent kitchen like a gunshot. Lincoln actually flinched. Vince's jaw worked methodically. I could see the muscles in his neck straining as he forced his teeth to break down the carbon-dense pastry. He swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing. It has a remarkably bold flavor profile, Vince said smoothly, his voice devoid of any pain. We appreciate Tyler culinary innovations. Dom immediately picked one up, chewing it with the grim, watery-eyed determination of a man swallowing broken glass. Incredible texture. A true masterpiece. Jax didn't even chew. He just popped the entire tart into his mouth, crushed it with a sickening sound of protesting molars, and swallowed it whole. Wyatt took a delicate nibble, nodded approvingly, and discreetly washed it down with half a bottle of expensive whiskey. Lincoln stared at the 4 deadliest men on the East Coast. He looked at their watering eyes, their rigid postures, and the sheer, unadulterated madness in their pheromones. They were deliberately poisoning themselves just to prove their devotion to his little brother. Lincoln let out a long, exhausted sigh and rubbed his temples. You are all completely insane. You are actually perfect for him. My brother stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He pulled out a sleek, black checkbook, scribbled a number with entirely too many zeros on it, and slid it across the marble counter. For the damages to your foyer, and for the future damages to your gastrointestinal tracts. He walked over to me, his cold Mafia persona melting away. He pulled me into a tight, fierce hug. "I am glad you are alive, Toby," he whispered into my hair using my childhood nickname. "If they ever hurt you, I will burn New York to the ground. But please, try not to blow them up." I promised Lincoln I smiled, hugging him back tightly. Once the Vance Syndicate officially withdrew their forces and the estate gates were secured, the adrenaline that had been keeping me upright suddenly vanished. The heat cycle that had been violently interrupted by the attack came rushing back with a vengeance. My knees buckled and my vanilla scent flooded the kitchen, thick, sweet, and overwhelmingly desperate. Vince caught me before I hit the floor. "We have got you." Tesoro Vince murmured, his voice a low, soothing rumble that vibrated against my chest. They didn't take me to the panic room this time. They carried me up the grand staircase, past the bullet-riddled walls, and into the master suite. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, locking the rest of the world out. The air in the room shifted heavy with the intoxicating mix of cedar dark musk sea salt and rain, their alpha pheromones blending perfectly to blanket my distressed vanilla. I wasn't an assassin anymore, and I wasn't a maid. I was their Omega. "Are you sure?" Tyler Jacks asked, his voice rough, his massive hands incredibly gentle as he brushed the hair from my sweating forehead. "Once we do this, you are ours forever. We will never let you go." I looked up at the four men surrounding the bed. They were battered, bruised, and completely devoted to me. They had gone to war against my brother, risked their entire empire, and willingly eaten my toxic baked goods just to make me smile. I'm sure I whispered, reaching up to pull Vince's collar. "Claim me, please." The bonding was a flawless, overwhelming symphony of pain and intense, euphoric pleasure. Vince's teeth sank into the scent gland on the left side of my neck, sealing the primary bond. A rush of pure golden warmth exploded in my chest as his protective, dominant emotions flooded my mind. Dom claimed the right side, his bite sharp and precise, filling me with a wave of absolute intoxicating adoration. Jack's mark rested near my collarbone, a heavy grounding anchor of unshakable loyalty. Finally, Wyatt claimed the space just below my ear, his bite sealing the connection with a fierce, quiet devotion. As the heat finally broke hours later, leaving me exhausted and thoroughly claimed, I fell asleep surrounded by the heavy, comforting weight of my pack. For the first time in my chaotic, blood-stained life, I was truly home. 2 months later. The Romano estate was peaceful. The foyer had been rebuilt with imported Italian marble, the syndicate treaties were holding strong, and the East Coast was thriving under the new alliance with Manhattan. It was a beautiful sunny Sunday afternoon. The alphas were in the drawing room reviewing some logistics reports. I was in my domain, the kitchen. I was attempting a highly complex, multi-tiered French vanilla soufflé. I had modified the recipe, slightly increasing the baking powder by about 400% for extra lift. Suddenly, a loud concussive boom rattled the windows. A thick cloud of dark purple smoke violently expelled itself from the oven vents. The biometric hazard alarm shrieked to life, bathing the kitchen in flashing red emergency lights. The drawing room doors burst open. 4 towering lethal Mafia lords sprinted into the hallway, but they didn't have their Glock 19 drawn. They didn't have their tactical combat knives. Vince, Jax, Dom, and Wyatt were all sprinting toward the kitchen, completely unbothered, each of them wielding a heavy-duty, industrial-sized red fire extinguisher. "I have got the left flank," Jax yelled over the alarms, pulling the pin on his extinguisher. "I will secure the perimeter," Wyatt called out, sliding across the marble floor. I stood in the center of the kitchen, covered head to toe in purple soot, holding a melted spatula. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. They might be the deadliest monsters in the criminal underworld, but to me, they were just my ridiculously overprotective firefighting husbands. And honestly, I wouldn't trade them or my convection oven for anything in the world.